the most calculating that she's ever been, and so we had to up the stakes. So we had to take you to the deadliest place on Earth, the place where everything's trying to kill you. So you're using mud to camouflage yourself, you're striking like a panther, disappearing into the canopy, instilling fear in the enemies to cause chaos. So this idea of using the environment, mastering it in order to get the upper hand on Trinity. And then we really wanted to make sure that we were delivering something very, very unique. We can't talk too much about it just yet, but we call it living history. This idea that Lara's going to interact with a living, breathing world like never before. I can say that it involves a hidden city, and it is the biggest hub that we've ever delivered in a Tomb Raider game. So we'll have more details on that in the future, but for right now, just know that there is an absolute ton of exploration and wide open gameplay to be had.
I've lived in the VO booth because of it.
True.
I'm living it. I'm like, it never ends.
How much can she explore?
Everywhere.
We want to record that. Lara's just standing there like, this city never ends. There is so much gameplay.
We have it
in this
recorded
city.
here. We have it recorded here.
What convinced you to debut the gameplay publicly at a film festival, or Tribeca Film Festival?
That's a great question. We absolutely are holding the gameplay for the entire world, for later on in the campaign of E3, but at the very, very first part of this, and when Dan and I were talking about how we wanted to run the campaign and talking with Riley, we said we want to make sure that we're bringing people in as early as possible, and that we are running the most transparent campaign that we've ever done before. So when we did our reveal events last night, we had not just press, but also influencers, fans, community leaders from around the world flown in. We had an event in London, one in LA, one in Montreal. And the idea was get as many people, again, sort of behind closed doors like you guys were, but get the game in as many people's hands as possible. So they were playing, an hour and a half worth of gameplay that you guys saw a cut down version of today at the festival. But we really want to make sure that we're showing as much as possible about Shadow of the Tomb Raider and keeping our foot on the gas toward that September 14th release so that you get to see it and then you get to play it in a very short period of time.
Story-wise, what drew you to the Mayan apocalypse as a story frame?
Well, obviously, the Mayan culture is fascinating, very deep. There's a lot of material to find out about it. Everything that they knew about mathematics and astronomy is interesting. And of course, the apocalypse, in addition to being a dramatic and terrifying event, it gives us, a definite end, a ticking clock against which all the rest of the drama in the game can play.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love, just to add to that about the Tomb Raider games, is that we call them Googleable myths. There's always that, while they're fictional, we always look to historic events and facts that can give us a nice leaping off point so that we tell the narrative we want to tell, but it helps ground what we're doing. So, when Jill and the rest of the team are writing stories, or when, Camilla's, doing the performance capture for it, there is that, yes, I know what the Maya apocalypse is. I know what the significance of the eclipse as a harbinger of doom is. And so it kind of grounds that story and keeps that relatable survival lens that we have on the events, even though it's obviously a fantastical voyage, still makes it feel very grounded.
Right here in the back.
Did you guys spend any time in the areas that you included in the game, and what are some of the most fascinating things you found in Peru and whatnot?
Yes, I got married in Mexico, not in a resort. I got married in Mexico. I go a lot there. It's one of our passion. A lot of people on the team. So you ask about the Mayan. We love the Mayan culture. All the powerful fantasy. Yes, we got there. We sent people taking pictures, filming, experiencing also the culture. It happens also in Peru, more southern. So we have a lot of people doing there. So yes. We are passionate about it, so we went there a lot of time, yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
So the brutality is clearly escalated. Where are you going to take the series from here?
Well, we're really focused on Shadow of the Tomb Raider for right now. I think that's a two-part question. We're really focused on delivering Shadow of the Tomb Raider right now, so we don't want to talk, about the future. In terms of the brutality, you're right that the stakes are higher now, and what we always try and make sure we're doing is not have gratuitous violence, but rather depict the life and death situations that Lara's in a very realistic manner, because failure in a survival situation has consequences. And we always want players to think, yeah, if I mess up, then bad things happen. And on two ways. One, in terms of the brutality that Lara is causing, because in some ways she feels like she's justified. And this gets to Camilla's point, you know, the idea that Lara is in a situation where she is racing to stop the Maya apocalypse, and she feels in some ways like the ends justify, or the means justify the ends, and we have to constantly draw her back. And that's why actually having characters like Jonah, and Jill, you can probably talk more about this, as sort of that moral compass of like, Lara, what are you doing? You know, kind of pulling and causing that contrast is something that we really like in the story. And
it's also part of understanding the consequence of your action. When we talk about brutality, this is a brutal world that we're depicting right now, and the game will have less combat. You know, we're balancing more the tunes and the traversal and the combat in the previous one, because we want to focus more on how smart she is and how she's. But of course, in the previous game, she drew a line. She said, I will never cross that line. This is very important. Whatever I do in previous two games, this is even a rule that we established as a developers. You know, we were like, we never want Lara to cross that line, and it became part of how she thinks, and you know, and that's the thing in this game, because Jill was talking a bit about that. You know, she has so much pressure on her. Okay, imagine when you have to do a speech or things. There's a lot of stress, but imagine that the fate of the world is on you because you caused it. It's a massive amount of pressure, and she, at a certain point, will cross that line, and she will realize how much she was wrong doing it. And Jonah is important now. Is, as you can see, he also physically changed. You know, he has his own arc, because he will tell, you know, he will be there saying, you're going too far, because she's obsessed. You know, everything that happened to her, she lost everything. That's why this is the story, to really understand what it means to be a Tomb Raider, a protector of the world. You know, when I say the Tomb Raider, I'm saying the Tomb Raider. The Tomb Raider posed this game to understand what it is, you know, to what is the stake of the world, how to protect it. So she will cross that line, and I will say that it's gonna be for her something that, you know, will be something that she will regret, and you know, but she needs to test that water to really understand it. I would say that's.
I think it's also important. It's not brutal end to end. There is a lot of contrast in both the gameplay and the story. There's the darkness, and there is also, I think, more light in a lot of ways than we've seen previously.
We were laughing, scenes we were laughing like crazy.
And we get that through our open, explorable areas that we'll be telling you more about later. And we also get it through characters like Jonah, who's been there from the beginning as this like warm force of friendship, who is that friend who always has her back, but is also the one person in the world who can call her out. We finally get to see him exercise that power.
Yeah, and that's actually what, when we say Lara Croft's defining moment, that's actually what we mean. That Lara going through her darkest hour and how she comes through that darkest hour is what makes her become the Tomb Raider she's meant to be. It's that decision that she makes, and again, we're not going to spoil anything, but as Dan was saying, when she realizes that she does become closer to the enemy she's fighting, or even become that enemy for a moment, when she does realize that she's crossed the line, when Jonah is telling her you've gone too far, all these things where she realizes that my actions have consequences and I have to deal with them, and finds out her place in the world, all these things come together of Lara pushing through.
And dealing with them in the right way, and that's how she doesn't know how to deal with it. You know, normally in the past two games, she was doing through the actions. I need to do this. I will do it. I'm the only one who can do it. That's what the scene says. And that's what Jonah says, you're the only one who can do what? And that's just like, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with this otherwise than just through actions.
Excellent, thank you.
Can you expand a little bit about, you said earlier that Lara was the one character that stuck with you the most. Can you explain a little bit why? And also for the team, you talked about Jonah being like the moral compass. When you was developing it, can you talk about where did you find that line that you knew which was right and which was wrong? Because you talk about there's a very thin line. So can you expand upon that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, maybe let.
Okay.
Camilla,
So she is the character that stuck with me the longest for a few reasons. Just a very broad reason is that she has been the character that's challenged me the most as an actress, in that she's hit rock bottom in so many ways. I mean, part of her, the brutality you're talking about, that's her hitting rock bottom. That's her at some point having to look at herself and wonder who she has become, like we say in the trailer. And that's tough as an actress. Like, it's very tough to play those moments, but I'll be able to talk more specifically why I, as a person, relate to her, and she has stayed with me the longest after the game is released, because it's sort of there's a part of this specific game that was, I don't know if you remember the day we were filming one scene. Wait, I just couldn't. I needed moments to just take to myself before we could even get back into it, because it was such a struggle emotionally for me. And so once the game's released, I can sort of get more back into why even now, like, I still think of the end of the game and why specifically to me as a person it was a moment.
It's the line scene. It's actually the
it's the eel wrapped around. No.
I think we've really pushed
Yes.
our actors, and
Yes.
also worked quite collaboratively.
Yeah.
There are many scenes, especially that flood scene, that we weren't sure if we should even keep them in the game until after we had captured them and they came alive in the studio. And that happens sometimes. You work on it as hard as you can, and then you get there and you realize, oh, that's what was missing. Actors.
I think
Do you want? Oh, sorry.
I just also think that, like, with Daryl, who is our on-set director, and he's with me in the VO booth too, towards the end of the game, the scenes that I had to play, I was angry at him for making me go there emotionally. Because you have to go to such a dark place. And I was pissed. I don't think I've ever been angry at a director, but I was like, I can hate you.
Angry at me.
So painful to play. And it was.
I do feel like I learned something about what certain types of scenes demand of actors, and how many of them you can reasonably expect in a 10-month window.
And then what it means for you to pull on your own personal experience and plug that into the character, because that makes it more real for you. So I'll be able to speak more about it when the game's done, but it's a very powerful ending.
We do that when we're writing too, but I think we get to process the result of it more privately and over a greater amount of time. So you're seeing a lot of flesh and blood in this game.
It's because we're also exploring the inner, what she thinks, more than 2 previous games. We're going into more our doubts and feeling and emotion. This is way more emotional from that perspective. That's why we're pushing a lot on that level.
I think the ending will touch a lot of people. I think the ending will make people wonder what they would do if they were Lara.
And I think that speaks also to the second part of your question about Jonah as the moral compass. I look at it as Jonah's almost asking things that we want the player to be thinking. We want the player to be questioning Lara's actions. We want the player to be saying, are you crossing the line? And I think Jonah accomplishes that in a couple ways. In some ways, he can pull her back, right? Because sometimes he can check her and say, no, you've gone too far, and she'll recognize it. Sometimes it serves to push her even further away, because Jonah's like, what are you doing? And she's like, no, I have to do this. And sometimes it's just to show just the absolute contrast between where they are, where Lara used to be, to see how far away that if Lara, as I was saying in the panel, is put so much pressure on herself, and she's internalized this conflict so much, and that everything that's happening has put so much external pressure on her, that if even Lara and Jonah's relationship is starting to see those stress fractures, you know how bad things have gotten.
And the reason why for Jonah is because we tried other characters, we tried a couple of things, but Jonah is the only character that we felt that Lara, would confide to him, that she will express how she feels, and he's the only character that was believable for us, that he would say, stop. And that for us, it felt naturally. We tried a lot of crazy characters and stuff.
I mean, I don't want to make him sound like too much of a nanny either, though.
No.
I think a lot of what he
That's not a
does
thing.
is he just shows us through his own actions what the other way of doing things would be. So while Lara's going to climb and kill and do whatever she has to get to the root of her problem in her way, he is talking to people, he is finding out how things work, he is solving problems in just a different way. And it just shows us a contrast that helps us wonder, like, what is she doing?
I had a question when it comes to the gameplay. Y'all always talked about like how amazing the tombs are, and I know this game y'all got underwater tombs.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Have you ever thought about allowing the player create their own tomb? And that would be fire, B.
Yeah.
You like create your own tomb.
We did talk.
We always listen to our fans and
See,
love
you
hearing
always do
ideas
that.
like that.
You always do that to
You
me.
know, Gerard, I'm sorry, man. I know where you're going. I'm gonna catch you wrong. We always
And you can
listen to our
upload it
fans,
online and let
and
people
we
play
love.
the tomb. You create. Oh my god. Okay. All right.
We'll talk later.
So the season pass mentions new adventures, and with this game being the third and final installment in this trilogy, how are these new adventures going to play into the story, or is the story before the DLC conclusive in its ending?
That is a great question. We'll have more details on the season pass moving forward, but what we are going to say is that after the game launches in September, then starting in October and for 7 months, we will have a new challenge tomb, and each one of those challenge tombs will come with a new bit of narrative around it, new side missions, a new weapon, a new outfit. So we'll have more details on that in the future, but it is going to expand what you can do in the world.
Wow. Way in the back there. With this being the third game, can you talk about a little bit of the challenges to keep the gameplay and the story fresh?
Yeah, the thing was important for about when you're looking back on Rise and Tomb Raider 2013 in this game, we were thinking about how can we bring this to the next level, also for in terms of the story, but also ingraining the story in the gameplay. So when we're looking at it, we're looking at it from a fantasy standpoint, from a story standpoint, and we said how can we make it more real and for Lara to convey that she's going to become the Tomb Raider. You have to have this evolution. And for us, when we look at it from a gameplay standpoint, we say, what would Lara now do? What would Lara in this situation? Like, for example, one of the things we were talking about going down a lot. So that's where, the rappel thing came in, because you have to go. We watch a lot of documentaries on spelunking underground and things like that, underwater. So we were watching a lot of this. We were studying a lot, and we felt that was part. If we want to go to these terrifying tombs, these dangerous tombs, you have to go down, and it has to be super deadly. So we have to make the gameplay evolve with that. Also, if we're saying that Lara now, she's more proactive, she's more experienced with survival. Now it's not like just about surviving, the environment. It's more than that. Now she would become actually, like I said, the jungle. We talked about the jungle. So now the enemies are actually trying to survive the world like Lara would do normally in the two previous games. So that was for us also important. And the next step, we're like, okay, now that we have a more proactive Lara that really understands what it is about surviving. So we push the crafting, for example, the skills and all that to the next level to represent that. So our hubs, yes, they are bigger, and yes, there's a lot of things to find in there, because we wanted you to push the type of Lara that you will be creating, you want to create, you will be expressing that. So that was important for us, that this evolution in terms of the pillars that we have goes to the next level.
I think also, just to add on, like, character-wise for me, there were glimpses of that Lara that we know and love, where she was a little more cheeky at points, and she's lighter and she's funny. And so for me, that was exciting to see that in the depths of where she is in this game. I can see the cracks, and you can see that light, and like, oh, there's Lara. She just doesn't know that, like, she hasn't exposed it yet.
Exceptions that prove the rule.
Yes, yes.
And we've really tried to make each character very well-rounded, so they all have these multiple facets. And although we do still have, the big blockbuster story with all the set-piece moments that we love out of Tomb Raider games, we also have a lot of character-driven story that drives them to these extremes.
There were some scenes, sorry, just to add a little bit added on that. There was some scene that we were asking ourselves, well, what would be Lara sitting down and taking a coffee? What would that be? And we were thinking about it like, well, we never thought about it. So this game, we said we have to do that. That's why the first scene, and we had a couple of jokes, because she has to relax and having a couple of jokes. So these are light moments, because even we talk about how dark it is very light also. So that's the balance that we need to achieve. If it's dark, you have much more light moments to balance that.
Since the first game, you've been talking about trying to make her become the Tomb Raider, that people are familiar with. But you've had 5 years, going on to 8 years, and she's becoming her own character. So how do you balance creating the Tomb Raider that people are familiar with the character she's already become during this journey?
That's a great question, and I think it starts with the distinction between Lara being a Tomb Raider, which is what she was in Tomb Raider 2013 and Rise of the Tomb Raider. She absolutely was raiding tombs, and becoming the Tomb Raider, which is what she will become by the end of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Because right there is a distinction. Whenever we're looking at how do we balance between the classic franchise and the reboot universe, we always try and pay what we call respectful homage. So for example, when we took you back to Croft Manor in Rise of the Tomb Raider, fans were like, I want to go back to Croft Manor. We said, okay, fine, but this is not the Croft Manor you saw before. This is in a state of disrepair. This is Lara turning her back on the fortune of what happens to Croft Manor when that happens. This is swimming through our survival lens. Fans are always saying, we want to swim, we want to swim. We're like, okay, be careful what you ask for, because now swimming is some of the most tense moments. Every time I watch people watch that scene where she's climbing up through that and the rocks are falling down, people are holding their breath. Crazy, it's like, that's what swimming is in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So without giving too much away, we are going to put our modern reboot lens on what it means to become the Tomb Raider. And that's how we will balance, again, respectfully, what's come before. Doesn't mean that at the end of the game she's going to strap on 2 pistols and start backflipping over every enemy. It means we're going to show you what it means to be the Tomb Raider in this world.
That's good.
So building off of that, do you see the character development of Lara as a fluid situation, or are you building more to something that resembles the classic character?
It's definitely, well, we know the arc that we've always wanted Lara to go on. And the arc is not necessarily to get to the point where we're like, okay, and now that's Tomb Raider 1996. And I don't want to go into too much more details because it would spoil what it means to become the Tomb Raider, as I was just saying. But it's definitely more about how do we take what you've always loved about Lara Croft, whether it's the fact she's a brilliant archaeologist, or the acrobatic movement, or the fast-paced action and the puzzles and the tombs. Like, we always look at it as what does that mean in our survival action formula, and so we'll do the same thing when we show you what it means to become the Tomb Raider.
By the way, I held my breath for that part and I gave up like halfway through.